Did Thomas More seek to abolish private property? Did he try to pull a Quasimodo by predicting the rise of Mao's CCP? But most importantly, was Thomas More a socialist?
Yeah, boy.
Now wait, hold on. It's much more than that. In fact, this question cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. To fully comprehend whether More was a man for all socialists or not, we first need some context. It's first imperative to mention More's surroundings. He was an immensely wealthy, gregarious fellow known for his piety and his pocket. He was a prolific lawyer of the 15th and 16th centuries, rising to the point where he used his practice as a political outlet. His wit and virtue attracted key political figures, notably Henry VIII, who selected More as Lord Chancellor of all of England. However, his demise would come from the hand that fed him, as Thomas More was martyred by Henry after refusing to affirm this monarch's second marriage. It is additionally significant to note that Thomas More's influence extended far beyond his own era, reaching even into modern revolutionary thought. For example, Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution and the USSR, explicitly praised More as a forerunner of socialist and communistic ideas. In his writings, Lenin referred to More as a visionary who anticipated fundamental critiques of private property and class-based society, highlighting Utopia's communal structures as a precursor to later socialist models. This acknowledgement by Lenin demonstrates the lasting impact of More's ideas across differing historical and ideological contexts. But back to his death. The instance demonstrates his faith in his convictions over country. But what exactly were these beliefs that have such a deep influence on society and political theory? A deeply Catholic lad, Thomas More was a defender of the Church first and foremost, writing several apologies in the wake of the Reformation. Second, he was a commentarian, mainly known for his authorship of the Utopia. But for the importance of this video, it is crucial to mention how he was able to put his words on the printed page. In other words, which figures influenced More's thought process. After Augustine of Hippo and Thomas Aquinas synthesized the works of Platonic and Aristotelian figures, these works were harmonized with the tenets of Catholic theology. Notably for More, he was initially influenced by Plato's Republic, an ideal society that sees philosophers as kings and kings as philosophers. But more importantly, it is also one of the first presented proposals of a society that encouraged the abolition of private property. This was Plato's romantic ideal, but he inevitably relented in his laws to human nature and the necessity of private property, writing, "Such a course is beyond the capacity of people with the birth, rearing and training we assume." Essentially, he believed that human nature and its errancy made private property a necessity. Aristotle posited this as well. In his Politics, he goes further, decrying Plato's ideal of uniformity and arguing that communal ownership would breed discord rather than tranquility. Aside from the Greek greats, Jesus Christ himself spoke on the matters of private property and communal agency. In fact, he compelled his 12 apostles to detach themselves from temporal possessions and hold them in contempt, subjecting them to strict, obligatory poverty and communism. However, while these followers complied with this rigidity, Christ stressed the optional aspect of this life, demonstrating this distancing from possessions as the perfect fulfillment of the apostolic mission. And of course, we all know, man is not perfect. Indeed, as M.B. Schwalm puts it, Christ's teaching was not an attempt at a social revolution for the benefit of the proletarians of Palestine, but rather for their salvation. After Christ's early narrative, Christians lived in a looser interpretation of that of the apostles. While these converts inhabited communal settings, they were still permitted to retain and sell property, albeit while providing these proceeds to the poor. The Church Fathers applauded this voluntary communism as well, but renounced it becoming a compulsory tenet of the faith, asserting private property once again. Then we reach St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who both held that private property is valid only under human, not divine law. They even conceded that the Garden of Eden, prior to the fall, was a state of perfect communism, but corruption made discrete property valid. Finally, we reach the 16th century, where certain church fathers attempted to persuade the public to adopt property as a precept, which, of course, was rejected on the grounds of concerns about idleness and mooching off of others. Now, after all of that information has been divulged, we come to the contemporary epoch of Thomas More and the other Christian humanists. The notions are split on goods, with Thomas Eliot showing little sympathy for communalism, and Ficino maintaining that private property is based on man's frustration of God's original plan of public ownership. The most notable humanist, aside from Thomas More, is the opinion of Erasmus, who himself believed that Christ harmonized communism with the universal Christian community. Furthermore, while contending that Aristotle actually muddled the true teachings of Jesus, Erasmus affirmed that Christ's communalism is meant to be honored and followed. Unfortunately, for the cause of the common good, Erasmus retracted this point by bowing to earlier thinkers' theories of human nature, due to Martin Luther's more radical opinions on the matter. After all that is said and done, we can now turn to Sir Thomas More himself and commence with his seminal work, Utopia, in which the main speaker, Raphael Nonsenso, espouses explicit proto-socialist and communistic ideals when speaking about the titular nation of Utopia. Specifically, Nonsenso, himself a Catholic, declares that the wisdom of Christ was so splendid that he would not have been ignorant of humanity's inherent nature, by stating that, if not for the pride of man, the King of Kings would have brought the whole world long ago under the laws of this commonwealth, that commonwealth being the communistic utopia. Nonsenso links Christian teaching directly to the viability of communal property, connecting More's religious context to the political structure described in Utopia. In other words, Nonsenso is saying that Christ's wisdom understood people so well that only human pride stopped a more perfect, communal society from occurring. This makes it clear that the ideals of Utopia are rooted in both spiritual and practical concerns. This cynical statement from Nonsenso directly supports the argument that More contemplated the relationship between ideal communal life and human imperfection. Further evidence for this interpretation arises from More's correspondence, where he writes that mankind's corrupt mortal nature does not cherish lovingly what is private without detriment to what is common. Simply put, More is observing that people tend to value their own possessions more than what is shared, often harming the common good in the process. This quotation demonstrates how More draws from both Christian doctrine and practical observation to support a pragmatic view of communal society, tying the textual evidence directly to the broader question of whether More was advocating for socialism or merely acknowledging its challenges. So, in this utopian world of public ownership, with a 6-hour workday, omni-democratic yet hierarchical government, and religious tolerance, More would most likely believe that it would depend on human agency to conduct their lives to the fullness of Christ, and, if not, so be private property and sin. But this, once again, is not the full story. Recall Erasmus's point of Aristotelian obfuscation. Perhaps people were living a Christian life perverted by the doctrines and authority of Aristotle or clever moralists. This is most assuredly a possibility, and is backed up by a witticism of More regarding human nature. That which you cannot turn to good, so order it that it be not very bad. So now, I pose the question, should Christians strive to bend Christ to the lives of men, or men to the life and morality of Christ? It seems that the latter is more ethical, teleologically speaking. Christ, while not merely a social iconoclast to the people of Palestine, of course did dispense critiques of common life many times. The lofty doctrines of Christ, and some of those practices of man, even that of private property, can definitely be viewed as compatible as fire and water. So we need to halt in asking ourselves to moderate our lives based on Aristotle, Plato, and other wise men, and turn to the wisest of all men, the Lord Jesus Christ. More may have been inclined to this message. If he were in our society today, he certainly would have not advocated for the perpetuation of big business, usury, and endless war. Even if it were in moderation, he would have sought to live closer to the life of Christ, and perhaps been inclined to lay down his possessions and even his life, as he did centuries ago. While he, of course, would have recognized the free cooperation of God's creatures, although More's past in this is shaky. He still would have encouraged his fellow man to loathe the life that leads to death. More's past as a humanist, no doubt, would have been evidential to this. Thomas More and other humanists of the 15th and 16th centuries did not entertain an immediate and practical initiative to the question of private property, but they wrote extensively about it. continually contemplating everyday life while suggesting ways to improve it. Moreover, what they especially did was critique the world they lived in. More's Utopia again positions Raphael Nonsenso to rebuke the practices of monopolies, the sale of public and priestly offices, and the lack of common and good welfare. So while it is absolutely arduous to pluck out a clear and dear answer to the question of more and communism, there is the clear response of living the good life, the life like that of Christ. So what does More's ambivalence to the communistic ideal suggested in Utopia mean he was false to it? Absolutely not. As said, even Christ encouraged, but never coerced, his children to adhere to the perfection of communal property. He knew, as Christ knows, that as the mass of Christians are mutable and fallible, private property will persist, especially to maintain peace and order against certain groups from abusing socialism. More does not provide us a clear answer. It all depends, as the man for all seasons he was, would say. He would continue to maintain the ideal, but would always see and seek reality and truth. More always supported a commonwealth's success to be measured by the well-being and happiness of its people, and if private property were necessary for that, he would abide by it, but only for the absolute good. Human law, More would say, concurs to the clearance of private property, but never that of divine or natural law. It is important to note that this is merely a human law and can be codified and ameliorated for the greater good, whether that be by curtailing inequality, limiting big business, extending the welfare state, and so on and so forth. So what can we take away? In the end, More calls us to balance ideals with reality, to seek justice, charity, and the common good above all. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. Thomas More believed the value of any society lies not in its wealth or laws or glory, but in how it serves its people. A better world begins with living that truth. More was not against communism in general, but it was always against the infeasibility of a principle. Indubitably, More did not want to cast pearls before swine. So overall, in the heart and mind of St. Thomas More, the Englishman realized that his fictitious utopian commonwealth, akin to Plato's republic, would perhaps never see formation in the Christian West, except only if men were angels. More, who through Christ reached the true utopia, would tell us to be patient for the New Jerusalem, not as a temporal, moral ideal, but as happiness in heaven.